who is winning. I think Ukraine is doing so much better than everyone thinks we're doing. If you look at Russia's original plan and the original strategy or plan, Russia isn't winning the way it wants. They wanted Kyiv in 3 days. They wanted our capital, and we're now in the 4th year of war, and Ukraine still stands. And if in 2022 Kyiv was surrounded on 3 sides, there were invasion on 3 sides of the capital, now I have to drive 8 hours to see the first Russian, right, all the way to the east. So Kyiv itself was surrounded in the beginning, now life in Kyiv, like fully back to normal, aside of missile attacks and Shahed drone attacks. Russia has already lost its primary goal, is to take Kyiv and demilitarize Ukraine. It's not going well for them. And the reality is, after 11 years of war, we take 2014 as well, Russia has managed to take like less than 20% of our country. For 11 years, for the second biggest army in the world, and for the size of the military that they have, that, if you ask me, that is not victory at all. They failed to take everything that they wanted, essentially.
How's your day going?
Crazy.
Is it crazy? Why is it crazy?
Yeah. I'm coming back from organizing a huge military event on unmanned ground vehicles. And so I didn't properly sleep for the past 4 days, probably. I got off positions, traveled across the country to Western Ukraine. So I didn't sleep the whole day. I drove all the way to Western Ukraine. Then had a day of preparation because the location was not ready. Like, everything went wrong. Then the whole day of the event itself, I was the host, the speaker, the everything. And then traveling back. So just not a lot of sleep, a lot of crazy things happening. But compared to being in position and what's happening on the front line, it's really nothing.
Yeah, no, I get that. Sleep deprivation really sucks, even if it's because you're training or planning, for sure. You said they're unmanned vehicles. What kind of unmanned vehicles?
Unmanned ground vehicles, or ground robots, ground drones, whatever you want to call them. But they essentially, what it sounds like, the ground robots.
For sure. What are you guys using them for?
Mainly for logistics and evacuation. So before, we would have to bring everything by hand to our positions. And sometimes, like, for a while, we couldn't drive further or like closer than at least a kilometer away from positions, or maybe 2 kilometers. And so everything for like fortifying our positions we have to bring by hands, and it would take a lot of men to carry and a lot of time to carry. And that's where we get the most injuries as well during logistical operations, where people would just move from position to position. And so ground vehicles is an amazing solution to that. So you don't have actual men carrying it from position to position. You have a ground vehicle driving, you just have to load it and then unload it. And also now for evacuation of soldiers, same reason. When we had a wounded, you'd have to carry it for 2-3 kilometers sometimes. And you would have additional wounded because you carried a wounded. And so now we try to use unmanned ground vehicles when possible, or when it's difficult for people to do that. And we are now moving into strike UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles. Those would be the ones with machine guns, like 7.62 or like Browning, and also ground kamikazes. Exciting.
Wow, kamikazes, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
How long have you guys been using those, the kamikaze ones? Or you guys haven't yet?
So we have. So my brigade, the brigade that I work with, the Assault Brigade, is like number 1 in use of ground vehicles right now. We accounted for over 60% of all use of unmanned ground vehicles in Ukraine. So we started using them pretty early on. First evacuation we've done in Avdiivka for early 2024, and first kamikazes we did like May 2024, so over a year ago.
Wow, it's really interesting to hear you talk about this because it's changed so much. You look at the landscape of Ukraine. One of the things I noticed immediately when this started was was trench warfare, right? And how old that is. World War One very much is known for its trench warfare, and then to see you guys in lines in trenches again, it's warfare doesn't change much. It's still people dying, it's still brutal, it's still muddy, it's still bloody, it's still disease and all of that. But now you add drones to this, and kamikaze drones, which unmanned, and it's cool to hear about using them to move things to and from the line. That way you guys don't have to. Is that something that everybody is probably going to get, or is this a very limited thing to specific brigades?
No, it's something that everyone is trying to get into, little by little. It's not hard to operate them. They essentially have you ever had, you probably had as a child, like the remote controlled cars?
Oh, yeah.
Very similar. It's very similar in how you operate them, but
For sure.
you have to plan really well. You have to plan where it's going because Russians also see it and try to strike it as much as possible. So you have to do good planning. You have to put the connection where it's needed. You have to make sure that the planning is the most difficult part of using unmanned ground vehicles.
Of course.
Just operating them is pretty easy.
When it comes to you guys using them, what do you see the Russians use? Are they using very similar things?
We have seen them use unmanned ground vehicles with turrets, like machine guns, already. We have seen them use them for logistics as well, and evacuation too. But they are slower in this sense than us. We care about our soldiers a lot more than Russians do, and so we do try to find ways to minimize the risks for our soldiers. And so I think that's why we are faster in using unmanned ground vehicles, because the key here is to save as many people as possible, and Russians don't necessarily put that as a priority. Got you.
Okay. I want to keep talking about this, but I want to back up and get people to know you and who you are, right? I, again, appreciate you coming on and talking to me. And it's got to be really weird to go from being on the front line to training to now sitting in a room wherever you are talking to me on a podcast, and then you're just going to go right back to it. But what did you do before all of this happened?
I lived my life in the best way possible. I'm going to summarize it as that. I moved to the US when I was 15, first as an exchange student, and then I went to college in the US. And after college, I went to work in investment banking. So I was an investment banker at Morgan Stanley in New York City when invasion started.
Okay.
I was still a banker. And then when invasion started, my whole family, so I have a sister, she's a little bit older. So my sister, my mom, and my dad, they all joined the army in 2022 when Russia invaded. I'm from a north part of Ukraine. And from Belarus, Russia also attacked the northern part of Ukraine and occupied part of my state. And so all my family, I was very positively surprised. They all said, we're not going to leave. We're not going to stand back. We're just going to go and fight. We don't care that we don't know how to. We will learn. We'll do whatever's possible. If my mom's like, I'm going to cook, I'm going to do this. And then my sister's like, I'm going to fight. And my dad is like, I'm going to fight. So all of them just in a day became soldiers and defended our country. And at first they needed a lot of finances. So I was kind of the person helping them with buying a lot of their equipment and a lot of the gear. But with time I realized that just volunteering and sending money and raising money was not enough for me personally. And that I wanted to do more and be on the ground. And when it's the most difficult part and time of history of my country, I want to be a part of this, and I want to resist, and I want to fight for what I believe in, for my values. And so I gave up my job and came back to Ukraine.
Wow. About how long between then and leaving your job, or when the war started and did you leave your job, about how long of time was that?
I left my job end of 2022.
Okay.
So
not that long.
Like 1st or 2nd of December, I was in Ukraine.
Got you. And you got to Ukraine, and obviously I'm sure you met up with your family, right? And had a little bit of a reunion. But at what point did it come out that you were going to become a medic?
I had that planned before I left.
Okay.
Before I used to like to plan in advance and like I had a whole my career planned and obviously when I was like I needed to leave my job, I planned what I was going to do in Ukraine. So by the time I came back to Ukraine, I already applied to be a combat medic and I just was waiting for a place to open up to do training.
Yeah. Okay. I'm interested to learn about Ukraine, and I say that because the this war that happened came off right at the end of a war that the United States was fighting for 20 years. I know you know, global war on terror, and immediately there was a lot of very upset people when it came to knowing that the United States has all these issues because of being at war for 20 years, and then was giving money and arms to another country for another war when Americans feel like there's a lot of things at home that we have to take care of and need to take care of. And I think that because of that, so many people sort of found out about the worst things about Ukraine and used that as a way to make their judgment on the country and then you guys as a people, right? And I bring that up to say that, and this is totally objective because this is like the Western point of view when it comes to Ukraine, right? I bring that up to say that there's this thought process that Ukrainians are interested in being Russian and that you guys don't have a sense of sovereignty and don't have a sense of independence. And this is a sentiment I see very often. And I can see you're smiling because I know you feel like that's not true. That's not how you feel, right? And and that's a sentiment that's expressed when it comes to not wanting to provide arms and aid. And now President Trump is selling those arms to the country of Ukraine, which I think a lot more people are okay with because it's not there's money, I guess, being exchanged coming back to the United States. But I guess I want to know the difference between, from a Ukrainian's perspective, Russian and Ukrainian culture, and why you guys aren't just Russians who live somewhere else and Vladimir Putin has invaded and is just reassimilating you guys into the USSR where you belong essentially. Does that question make sense?
I'm smiling because it's honestly like ridiculous for me to even hear the question. But it does make sense. I will try to elaborate on this a little bit further. So I was born after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and for me, it was never a question of where I am from. I was always a Ukrainian. But even people who were born in USSR, like my parents and my grandparents, they never saw themselves as Russians. They saw themselves as either Soviet people or Ukrainian inside Soviet Union, which was a union of republics. It wasn't a country of itself as a simulation of different nations.
Yep.
And Ukrainian nation is a lot older than Russian. I know if people realize that. We had a country way before there was anything even in Moscow. We had Kievan Rus, which is something maybe interesting for people to read more on. It was one of the first actual countries with like a declaration of independence and things like this. Is Kievan Rus, with capital in Kiev, like Ukraine is right now, and there were people who called themselves Ukrainians. They had the similar symbolic like we do right now in Ukraine, like the trezub. Our coat of arms is very similar. And then afterwards, we had Kazakh system, which was also a semi, I would call it a country at the time. It was in 1500s. There's also people had very distinguished culture, language, Ukrainian language, distinguished traditions, and the territory was still what it is right now, Ukraine. Russia and Moscow in itself, they started developing as a country a lot later than Ukraine has. So it's very unfair to even compare those two because Ukraine was first and then Russia emerged. And that's like, if you just look at the history. Do you want to do a follow-up question?
Well, so I know I wanted to say that the reason why I ask a question like that is because that is a sentiment from the Western POV that people have, right? And I want to hear from you. And if that sentiment is not true, which I feel like it isn't true because Americans are very proud people as well. When it comes to being an American, I think everybody knows that. We can get kind of obnoxious when it comes to who we are as a people, and to hear from you, right, that you are and identify as somebody who is a Ukrainian and you have pride in your country too. And this idea, this notion that, the Ukrainian government is just so corrupt and, the Ukrainian people, most of them, they speak Russian and they want to go and they want to be Russian anyway. And like, these are things I hear. These are not necessarily things that, I think, right. But to hear from you that, and disabuse that notion that, Ukrainians are Ukrainians and you guys are your own country and want to be your own country, right? And I know that may sound ridiculous, but that's just the sentiment that a lot of people use as a way to sort of excuse and I guess forget or cast off, cast the Ukrainian people aside, and that's why it's important, I think, to hear your point of view on that from somebody who is there and somebody who's experiencing these things and is Ukrainian, because it humanizes who you guys are as a people and not just as, a byproduct of Russia, which is what some people think and use as an excuse, So,
Yeah. Well, first of all, I believe there's no excuse to invade another country. There shouldn't be one at all. And second, yes, we are the people of Ukraine and we want to govern our own country and we want to set our own rules and we want to have our own government, as easy as it sounds. And to draw a parallel with Americans, like, yeah, we are very proud, just like Americans. That's why I felt very much comfortable when I lived in the US, because I felt like we shared a lot of the same values. And one of them is being very proud of who we are and we want to be, and that we want to govern on our own land, which kind of what it was like in the US. And yeah, so very similar values, very similar like sentiment. If I am 100% sure that if anybody came, God forbid, obviously, hope that never happens, to invade the US, people will do the same thing. They will stand up and they will say, no, this is my country, this is my land, this is my history, and I want to protect it. Very similar here.
Well, your country also is very agriculturally dense. There's a nickname for Ukraine. It's the breadbasket of Europe, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And there's obviously the American Midwest, and then the West Coast, specifically California, is known for its agriculture. California feeds so many people around the world, not just the United States. And there's a lot of similarities, and I think in Americans, specifically this group of Americans, and then Ukrainians, because you guys have a large agriculture industry. You guys have a lot of other industry when it comes to production and things like that, that Americans can relate to. And there's a retired U.S. Marine Corps colonel who I spoke to a couple months ago, and he essentially was aiding Ukrainian families coming to North Carolina on the East Coast. And the people that were coming, he was saying most of them were factory workers in Ukraine or farmers, and a lot of them are doing the same jobs there in the United States. And I say that to say that when you're leaving because of the war in Ukraine, you're coming to the United States, you're not a refugee who is coming to live outside and cause issues like what you're seeing in Europe and be homeless and, fight people on the street, all this crazy nonsense I see coming out of, these great cities in Europe, which is really unfortunate. He's describing a group of people who are coming to the United States and working, coming to the United States and putting their kids in school, coming to the United States and going to church, coming to the United States and contributing to the United States and want to be citizens or want to stay and contribute and be productive, right? And that is a commonality that you have with, Ukrainians and Americans. And that's kind of why I asked you that question. I know it's a difficult one to say because it seems ridiculous. Like if somebody tried to say, well, Americans are just a byproduct of Great Britain. And so, if Great Britain invaded the United States, then they should be okay with it because, Great Britain's just taking back its colonies or whatever. I think the same sentiment and maybe frustrations would have. But You've kind of described what it was like when you went from New York working for Morgan Stanley back to Ukraine. I'm sure when you were watching very intently the buildup on the Ukrainian border with Russian forces. A lot of people, and I'll admit, myself included, didn't think that he would go across the border into Ukraine, and was thinking that this is, again. And back in 2014, there was another invasion of Ukraine from Russian forces, and I think a lot of people forgot about that until the news started talking about the war. But did you think it was really going to happen, or did you think that it was posturing?
I didn't think it was going to happen. I'm going to be very honest with you. Because since 2014, after Russia invaded eastern and southern part of the country, there were multiple buildups at the border, both at the border on Belarus, but also on the border with Russia. And there were multiple times where we thought, oh no, they're going to invade, they're going to invade. And then with time, you just get used to it. You just get used to build up of the forces. But that was me as a civilian who didn't know much about the plans of Russians, but our government was more ready than us
Yeah.
to see that invasion.
Right. Okay. So you got to Ukraine. You signed up to be a combat medic, you said. What sort of training did you get before going and being a medic? Not a lot, or?
Not a lot, no.
No?
But that was more than people got in the beginning of 2022, so I'm just going to point that out. I had
Okay.
2 weeks of everything training. So it was like physical training, everything to be a medic because I didn't know. I was like afraid of needles and blood before the war. And it was training with like how to use a gun, how to carry a gun, and what to do in all sorts of situations, all in 2 weeks. And then as soon as I finished training on Sunday. Monday morning, I was on my way to Eastern Ukraine.
Wow. That's not a lot of time, especially to learn needles and medicine, right? Because you're saving people's lives, right? Would
Yeah.
you say you've gotten okay with needles and blood now?
I am super comfortable with them right now.
Yeah.
I learned most of the things, I want to add to that. I learned most of the things on positions already when I went on my first rotation. And the way it was done was very wise as well. I was put as an extra in one of the crews. So they had 3 people plus me, and I was learning a lot. So I was learning from 2 people that were a lot more experienced. And by the end of second week, I was already going as a full-time medic on
Wow.
crews to go and treat soldiers.
So you've never been a medic before. You got 2 weeks of training, and now you're going out to the front lines and you're treating people. What was that like immediately? Did you have somebody there who had experience as a medic? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
as a
yeah.
guide.
As I said, the first 2 weeks I was with 2 other people who were very experienced,
Okay,
and they
I
taught me
misunderstood
everything.
you. My apologies. Okay, what was that like though? The first time you had to treat somebody?
I was nervous. I'm not gonna
Mm-hmm.
lie, but I'm like an overthinker, but an overthinker in a way where I think about all the possible situations that will happen in the future and prepare for them. So for my first injured, I thought of all of the possible things that could have happened to him and how I'm gonna act in all of those situations. And so when I received my first wounded, I was ready. Like I was ready mentally, and that was the most important part because the most difficult part is to be calm and make sure that the wounded is calm because they see that you're doing something important. So the wounded, I don't think he realized that was my first time treating someone. Uh, I was nervous, but I think it went pretty well.
That's good. How has that changed now? You've seen probably dozens at least or more people injured. How has that changed for you? Same, just calm, but know that you trust yourself a little bit more experience wise.
Yeah, for me, it's different now because I'm the leader of the crew, of the
Okay.
evacuation crew, and in our platoon even, I'm like one of the most experienced people, which is funny again because I'm not a medic by training in civilian life, and a lot of them are.
Mm.
So the responsibility has changed a lot. I have to now teach other people who are joining as medics. I have to make all of the hard decisions. I have to sometimes make very difficult decisions. That has changed, but like I love my job. It gives me so much motivation to see how calm sometimes, how like what's the attitude of the wounded, because all of them are very transparent. Like I work with usually young people who are like in their 20s or their 30s, and they know exactly why they came to fight. They know that they're fighting for their values, that they're fighting for their freedom, that they're fighting for their families, to be able to have a family in the future, because a lot of them are very young. And for them, it's not scary even, right? I receive them and they're like, oh, I have, wound here and here and here. And sometimes they try to make jokes and they're very happy to see me. A lot of them know me already. And it's just, it's a very wholesome place, but at the same time, very scary.
I can imagine. When you guys are doing field medicine, and you talked earlier about drones, autonomous vehicles, how much does that change how you have to operate in the field with drones?
Drastically.
Yeah.
So I work on evacuation vehicle, and that is or used to be, and in the US by doctrine, it's two parts. One is case evacuation, second one is med evacuation. And in 2022, in 2023, and partially 2024, we did both. Medics did both case evacuation and med evacuation. And case evacuation would be done in like M113s or MTLBs, things like this, like armored vehicles. And I remember in 2023, we were by Donetsk, between Donetsk and Avdiivka, and we had our medical evacuation car 800 meters away from Russian positions waiting. And then we would go into MTLB, drive to positions, pick up wounded, drive 800 meters back, and then exchange the vehicles. And right now, it's impossible. Right now, first of all, we're not allowed to go on case evacuation. I know in some brigades, medics still are allowed to do that. In our brigade, we're not, because a lot of medics were killed during case evacuation, and it's a lot more valuable to have somebody who's more trained and more experienced, maybe even receive wounded a little bit later by minutes, but then having them to be in high risk. So right now we work only in medical evacuation. And that line where we stand has shifted back drastically. Now we sit back 7 kilometers, sometimes even 10, depending on the terrain. That's where we sit and then go for evacuation. But where we go for evacuation is again like 5 kilometers, maybe not closer than that. Now with an introduction of unmanned ground vehicles, partially case evacuation is done by them. So no people at all. And we stand a little bit back.
That got to be strange, probably, using a robot going out to get somebody versus what you were doing before. Does that make you happy, or do you wish you could still go out and get people?
No, I wish I could still go out and get people. I would like to control as much as possible.
Right.
But the air superiority on a tactical level by Russia is honestly impressive. In the sad part of this, you cannot, like any sort of movement, even with unmanned ground vehicles, but any sort of movement is controlled by Russia. As soon as anything starts moving, multiple FPV drones, multiple like Mavic, DJI Mavics are flying that way and trying to destroy it completely.
That is very difficult. Absolutely, air superiority when you don't have it to do anything, like you said. When you're going out there and trying to recover somebody and trying to evacuate them, or even doing field medicine on somebody right there, do you guys have any sort of detection for drones or protection? Like, what are you guys using to defend yourselves from drones? Do you guys have anything, or is it just your rifle?
We have some both protection and detection methods. For our vehicles, we have jammers for FPV drones. There is a question how effective they are, right? Because jammers only work on certain frequencies, and then Russians always try to change and adjust to the frequencies that that we are used to, and then they change the frequencies. So you have to
Yeah.
like change jammers all the time, or have massive jammers on your car, which make it very difficult to operate. Um, but yeah, we have jammers, and we also have detection methods. They are like small, look a little bit more. It's a little bit bigger than a phone,
Hmm.
and you can. It depends on what kind. It either tell you that there's a drone in the area that you select. It's usually up to 3 kilometers, or it can tell you, or you can see a video of an FPV drone that's the closest to you.
Hmm.
But when you see a video, you have to visualize where you are in relation to where the drone is flying. And but usually when we do know that there is a drone in the air, we just try to do a hideout until it passes us.
Right. There's a lot of video of people trying to run and hide from drones, and there's a lot of very unsuccessful videos as well from people trying, and from both sides. You know, Russians running from Ukrainian drones, and Ukrainians running from Russian drones. That's a very scary thing, and I say that to say that there's a conversation I see all the time about trying to decide whether or not using a drone like that should be illegal and useful, because there are rules, right? And whether people follow them or not is a whole nother thing. But this conversation about having whether or not they should be illegal, I think is a conversation worth having, just because, you know, firing a rifle at somebody is less personal than running up on them with a sword, right? Like if everybody had to, if we had to do warfare on horseback and with swords, I think a lot more people would be less apt to volunteer others or volunteer themselves to go out and do that. But using a drone and chasing somebody down, and some of the things that I've seen, basically just fucking with people while they know they're gonna die, and just fucking with them is pretty insane. You know, are you guys using them to move around medical supplies and get things out to people from in the air? Like, are you guys attaching medical supplies or anything like that to drones and then flying them out to positions? Yeah.
That as well, yes. Bombers, the ones that can carry larger, like bigger weight than FPV drones, they can still only carry a certain number of kilograms. But yes, sometimes, especially for positions where we cannot either use unmanned ground vehicles or have any people go and help, we would drop some of the medical supplies from them.
Mm. Yeah.
We had a case where we actually dropped blood
Oh,
on
really?
positions. Yes, that was in the winter. That was easier to keep the temperature
Yeah. For
cold.
us. Hmm.
Yeah, but we had that experience as well. It was
Interesting.
crazy. But
Wow.
it saved somebody's life. That's all that matters.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Where else have you guys had to get creative like that?
All sort of things.
Hmm.
I mean, if we go into drones, one of the operations that I think was out there in the media, at least in Ukraine, everywhere. I'm not sure about the United States, but it's called Spiderweb Operation. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't.
You have not. Okay, so that was June this year, where Ukraine essentially smuggled around, I think it was hundreds of FPV drones into Russian territory,
Hmm.
where the AFAC bases are. Some of them were like 500 kilometers away from Ukraine, but some of them were all the way in Siberia, which is like 6,000 kilometers away from Ukraine. But yeah, we smuggled like over 100 FPV drones into Russia, and they were
Mm.
disguised as house containers on
Okay.
trucks.
Wow.
And at certain point, we just let them fly in, and they hit Russian aircraft bases.
Hmm. Oh, yes, I remember seeing the video of this. Yes.
Exactly, yeah. So that's Spiderweb Operation, where
Okay.
we spent maybe like $100,000 on all of the drones because not all of them made it all the way there, right? And we hit aircraft bases that are worth like $7 billion, which is one
Hmm.
third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet.
Hmm.
That's a very creative operation, if you ask me.
Yes,
Pretty
absolutely.
efficient, very efficient use of resources, very
Hmm.
cheap if you look at the numbers of what we spent versus what we destroyed.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of operations like this on strategic level. There are a lot of deep strikes that are done again with drones that Ukraine is doing. I remember in July we counted, there were over 20, just the ones that we know about, the ones that were public, deep strikes on Russian military infrastructure and Russian like military production infrastructures as well, which I think are very impressive. Again, we don't use like expensive missiles. We use pretty cheap drones to deep strike strategic Russian military places. So
Mm-hmm.
we're spending a lot less than what everything that we hit is trying to get. So if we had over 20 that we know about in July, and that number is increasing every single month, like I'm excited to see where it's going in the next half a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a very new thing. Using the very cheap technology like that and destroying so much that is worth money, like way much more money than what a drone is worth.
Yeah.
It's very impressive to do something like that because that's going to change a lot. You know, so many countries are learning so much about how you guys are going at it with each other and using drones. You know, if you have an airfield that you're not defending well enough and you've got $1 billion worth of planes out there and you've got a $200 drone and it just destroys it, right? Like that, your cost benefit analysis on on aircraft and how much money you're spending on that is it's not good for that, you know.
Yeah.
Where else are you guys like using getting creative as far as like you talked about before we got on that you wanted to talk about like the modern warfare and how it's changing. What came to your mind when you said that that's what you wanted to share?
I speak with a lot of US veterans. A lot of them
Mm-hmm.
either come here to sometimes visit, help, train,
Mm-hmm.
or when I go to the US, people always ask me 100 questions about what the modern warfare looks like, because it is very different from everything that we heard from like Iraq, Afghanistan, and any
For
other
sure.
wars before. So that's why it feels like a lot of the information is not getting out there in terms of like spiderweb operations like this, deep strikes that Ukraine is doing, or even things on tactical level. So I guess I wanted this
Mm-hmm.
conversation to be like you asking what it's like on different sides of the modern warfare, and I can share what it feels like. So for drones, for example, the number I wanted to share earlier was that we estimate about 80% of all strikes on a tactical level are made by drones now. And then the number can be even higher sometimes, depending on types of operations that we're conducting. So
Mm-hmm.
even before we had like I was so scared of artillery when I first joined the war. Like
Mm-hmm.
artillery, that was something that I was like, oh no, oh no. But now I don't care about artillery.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that deadly. Now drones are the deadliest part of this, and that's something
Mm-hmm.
that we haven't seen in the wars before this one.
Yeah, no doubt. It'll be interesting to see if the United States, obviously the talk of the town, I guess to say, is that maybe there's a war coming between the United States and China in the Pacific, and the use of drones would be very that conflict would be riven with the use of drones, especially when you consider all the islands in the region and the Chinese have a very very large drone developing capability, way more than the United States right now. And I think they do that because they know they have to cover a lot of ground, but at the same time, drone swarming, things like that, right? It's yet to be seen how well an aircraft carrier strike group, for example, will be able to defend against something like that. And you've got maybe 1,000 or more drones coming at one ship or one position or whatever. So I think that this is like the beginning of that, and the worst of it, or even the most creative of it, has yet to be seen,
For sure.
and at some point will be seen. Where else? What else? Your what you were afraid of, like you said before, you were afraid of artillery before, but now you're not. Where else are your expectations changed in that vein? Right, like you.
Expectations
What I'm
from
saying, yeah, like you had an idea before you had been doing this for a couple years, that you would be afraid of artillery, and you were worried that artillery was going to be something you need to be worried about. And now you know it's drones. You're not worried about artillery. Where else has your initial preconception of what you were going to experience changed now?
I thought as a medic we would have some protection
Mm-hmm.
because by international law we should be protected as medics, but Russia
Mm-hmm.
does target specifically medics and medical evacuation cars because
Really?
they do know it's a priority for the infantry. Infantry will not survive without medics and medical
Mm-hmm.
evacuation. Um, so my expectation was that there's some sense of still some sense of humanity in Russian soldiers, but apparently there isn't. And that was very clear as soon as I joined the army.
Really? Wow. This is a thing I want to hear about a lot. You know, your interactions with the Russian military, and what they have been like, and you know, you said that their humanity is gone. You know, this is one of the most interesting things about, I think, conflict in the modern age too, is there's so much media about it that comes out, right? And you go on online, you see the same sentiment expressed about Ukrainian soldiers. They have no humanity. They do these things, and it becomes, that is, you know, it is what you see, I guess. And it goes both ways, is the point I'm trying to make here, is that the propaganda side of the war, when it comes to the internet, is makes it difficult to decipher like what's reality and what isn't, you know. And you have a point of view that is way different than most people, you know. And your interactions with Russian soldiers, or you know, meeting them on the battlefield, so to speak, not necessarily like meeting introductory, but like, you know, conflict with them, what that's been like in your estimation of them. It sounds like you said like they're not following traditional rules of war.
Yeah. Can I just make a comment for your previous question really quick before I
Mm-hmm.
forget and then move on to
Yeah.
this one? You spoke about the potential war between the US and China and things that need to be prepared. One thing that I did not mention before that is very relevant for the US and where Ukraine can be a good partnership is naval drones.
Mm.
Ukraine has no navy. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Zero. We have no ships right now. But we do have naval drones. And with that naval drones, we control over 30% of Black Sea,
Wow.
which is impressive.
That is very impressive.
And I believe Ukraine is the most forward in naval drones, and that's what US really needs to learn
Definitely.
about. Ukraine
Mm-hmm.
is a good, really good partner. So for both flying drones, for naval drones, and for ground drones, like we can be a really strategic partner for US to be able to build
Mm-hmm.
up its military and do it in the most efficient way possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's to your previous point. Now, for what's the reality in my interactions with Russian soldiers? Unfortunately, I do have to interact with Russian soldiers quite a lot. For every captured soldiers, a lot of them are injured, and I do have to treat them both in the field, and I do have to evacuate them. And we here in Ukraine, we care about our people getting back from captivity, so we do have to obviously, and by law, we have to take care of the captured Russians, and we do. And I give them the full spectrum of help that is needed. As much as I don't like it, I have to treat them because they are
Right.
the yeah that's the right thing to do. Um, the types of people are very different. Sometimes you meet people who are very ideological, and they even when captured and on Ukrainian territory are very vocal about how Ukraine used to be part of the bigger Russia and USSR was the best country in the world,
Mm.
and how I don't know what you guys are doing here with Americans, but we don't like it, so we want to get
Oh.
Ukraine back on track. So there are people that are actually like being super vocal about this and how
Wow.
they view both Ukraine and the US as like one big enemy
Mm.
that they're fighting against. That's one type of people. There are types of people that are just there for the money. The money is good, and they're from poorer regions of Russia. There's actually a very interesting article that was published this week about how it's very good for those poorer regions in Russia to keep the war going because it lifts up. It's I think the article is called like the new middle class of Russia.
Oh,
It lifted up a lot of the poorer regions in Russia, and a lot of the families were able like to move into better apartments or to get
wow.
like just better quality of life because their loved ones or their family members went and fought in Ukraine. So definitely interacted with those, and there were people that were just mobilized and they don't have the will, they don't have their own opinion. Like the thing that surprised me a lot, because I did think like the Russians were, I don't want to say similar to Europeans, but at least they had some kind of like we were I don't know how to say this, but I thought we developed in a similar ways
Hmm.
as humans. But when I spoke to some of them, I realized that a lot of them don't even have their own opinion about things. They don't have their own like will to do something. They have no values. They have no values. I think that was the best thing to describe it. So I asked them, so what do you think? Like, what do you think? What do you think of this? What do you think about you like killing my friends? How do you feel about this? And they're like, I no, I was told to do this, so I do this. And that's not those are not words of a human, because
Hmm.
I believe humans are a lot more mentally developed in that sense.
Hmm.
Um, but I was very surprised that they just did not have any opinion, did not have any values, and they could not distinguish right from wrong. That was very surprising.
Right. Yeah. No. When you read about even any older conflict, right, and you look at what it does to people and the way they think about others, right, it becomes, I think, almost a coping mechanism to other another group of people and not see them as humans, you know. And this is something I've read about, U.S. soldiers talking about it in World War II, right? Soldiers during World War One, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and to just think of the enemy, other people as not people, right? As not as just something you have to do essentially. I think it is a coping mechanism in a way to rationalize to yourself what you're doing. For some people, not for all people, that's for sure. Some people enjoy what they do very much, absolutely. But I want to hear more about this with the naval drones and the Black Sea. I want to hear more about what you guys are doing to cover the gap, so to speak, between, like you said, Russia dominates the airspace in Ukraine. Where you guys are covering for that? You said, naval drones. This is something that I've not heard a lot about. I would love to hear more about it and anything else. And I'll say this too, right? Like you're there. Any question that I have, is what it is, but I can't know what I don't know, right? And you know what people should hear, especially, right? If, let's just say, the Ukrainians and the Americans are partners in, God forbid, a global conflict, right? You said this is where the Ukrainian military could be a strategic ally for the United States. So I don't know what I don't know, right? What do you think people should know? I want to know more about what you guys are doing in the Black Sea, these naval drones, and then when it comes to modern warfare, you have a point of view that not many other people have. So, I think what I'm trying to say is you can educate me and a lot of other people in a lot of ways, and I just don't know what I don't know, so I would love to hear about it.
Yeah. But before, again, if I can just do
Yeah, no,
take
absolutely. You're fine, dude. Yeah.
you said sometimes as a coping mechanism, people don't see the enemy as
Hmm.
humans. And as a coping mechanism. For us, we didn't need to have that coping mechanism. For us, we see Russians as one of the other invaders, the people that came to take my country, my
Right.
family, my land, my history. Why would I need
Hmm.
to see them as something else? They're just invaders. And if you
Right.
ask any soldier, okay, maybe yeah, with small exception of people who actually like doing this, if you ask the majority of soldiers in Ukraine that are fighting, do they want to fight? They don't. They
Hmm.
would rather stay home, live their best life. Like I would rather be in Manhattan right now and drink my
Well, sure.
expensive cocktails and build my career. Do
Go
all
get a
those.
bagel and a slice of pizza. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Why did you say that?
Because that's what New
Everyone.
York's known for, New York
I
bagels, New
haven't had
York
a
pizza.
bagel in like 2.5 years. I want a bagel.
I hope you can get
Anyway,
a bagel at some point.
Thank you. But yeah, like nobody wants to fight. We all want peace. We all want this war to end. We
Hmm.
fight because we have to. There is no other choice, and we don't need to have a coping mechanism to disguise enemy as something else because they are what they are, invaders.
Hmm.
But that's just my like.
Can I say something on that too as well? You know, one of the first books I read on warfare was actually a book on the Crusades. So European knights going to the Middle East, and there's a bunch of, I guess you could say, firsthand accounts that are have survived from that era. I mean, they're talking hundreds of years ago, right? And one of the things that was a prominent opinion from European knights was that the Muslim fighters that they were in combat with, they knew that they had something that they were defending because they were defending their home, right? And this is what you're talking about versus going for, maybe they were going because they're of their Christian faith and their strong Christian faith, but a lot were going for money and these other things like that, like you said. And they noticed, I think this is concept that you're talking about of being invaded and having something more to fight for versus going because maybe your friends down the road are going, or you want money or whatever. The will you have to do something like that is going to I think run out a lot quicker than people who have been invaded or feel like their homes are being invaded. And I think that you make a very important distinction between that, right? I think that, just in general, maybe killing somebody else is going to require some sort of coping mechanism. But if you're defending your homeland, I know I would feel like if somebody was here in the United States, I don't care. I'm going to do whatever it is I have to do to defend my home, my state, my country, right? And it doesn't matter what that looks like because you're here in my country, and I'm going to do what it takes to take care, and keep people safe, right? So I'm glad that you drew that distinction between those things because it's important.
Thank you. On naval drones.
On naval
I think
drones.
yeah. On like the big numbers that are important is that like we do by estimates control over a third of like sea with absolutely no like big traditional ships, and also very expensive ones.
Mm,
The Ukrainian naval drones like Magura, the name Magura or Sea Baby, they cost about like $250,000, but
mm,
that's nothing compared to a cost of a proper like naval ship.
right.
Absolutely. Um, and Ukraine didn't get to this in one day. We only started reportedly publicly using them and showing results in the beginning of this year, end of last year, for the public ones. And it's important for our allies, US being one of them, to also understand that like you cannot develop a good any kind of drone, but naval specifically, in one day. It has to be one by one. And we've seen recently US naval drone program as well, and how it kind of hit rough waters,
Hmm.
if I may if I may
Yeah.
say that.
Pun
Um,
intended. Yeah.
yeah, but they were publicly like public announcements of U.S. Navy trying to build and then test the naval drones recently. Um, and what we've seen is U.S. is trying to build already all ready to go autonomous drone that can do all of these crazy things at once.
Hmm.
But as soon as they started testing, all of the basics went off. The software stopped working. I think one of them like a software glitch. Another one was some of the hardware components weren't adapted well to the environment. But
Mm,
Ukraine done all those things, right? We have started with the basics. Our drones were not autonomous on day one, and they're still not fully autonomous. Like you cannot make a very complicated solution at once. You have to go step by step. So we first build a universal platform that is good, that the hardware is tailored to the environment of the sea or any of environment that you're going to be operating in. And then we started
right.
adding a little bit of software and testing this and testing this and testing in real conditions. So it's very sad. It's sad to see that, even in first tests, the U.S. naval program drone program is already failing a little bit, but that's where Ukraine can come in and help understand what went wrong, or help with showing our drones, Magura, Sea Baby, how they're different from what US is building. Maybe US can buy those drones from Ukraine and both help Ukrainian infrastructure, give, fuel some money into our own manufacturing and development of those drones, but also get really good drones that are battlefield proven, that have shown the result already. That's on naval drones. But if you look at any kind of drones, even simple FPV drones, like unfortunately, we have not seen a ready-to-go solution that we've taken from the US on unmanned system level. And if you speak with frontline units, the event that I just organized, we also spoke about this. Everything that we received from outside of Ukraine, both Europe and the US, we had to redo, and we were not able to use it as it is on the front line.
When you say redo, what are you having to redo?
A bunch of different things. Sometimes like video transmitters, sometimes it would be antennas, sometimes it would be just the hardware itself.
So they weren't working, is what you're saying.
They were working in perfect conditions. They were not working on battlefield conditions.
Okay, I get what you're saying now. Got you. So you guys are having to augment them and adapt them to what you guys need them to be, right? Yeah, that's interesting to hear about, because I know there is so much information, and it is hard to decipher what's real and what's not, especially, and I'm talking now about what like is coming from the United States into Ukraine. And I know that like the idea is that Ukraine isn't getting the best of what the United States has, right? Like the naval drone thing you were talking about. I know that the U.S. has something called like the Manta, which is a naval drone, but it's not a I don't think it is transmedium, and when I say that, I mean that it doesn't go from the air to the sea. I'm pretty sure this one is meant to be a deep sea, or fully aquatic, not necessarily transmedium, both air and aquatic. But it's interesting to hear that, because there is so much to learn about what you guys are doing and modifying. I would like to think that the United States and NATO in general, the EU, whatever, is learning from what's going on and taking, like, do you guys provide information when somebody gives you whatever equipment it is and you have to modify it for the battlefield? Are you then relaying that information to where it came from to say, hey, this is what it needs to look like?
Yes, there are two ways that we usually get things. One is the traditional way, that is going through the official Ministry of Defense levels, but a lot of the things that we got from the US, from the traditional side of things, are not unmanned systems, so there are like not a lot of feedback that we can be doing. Most of the unmanned systems that we received were like American companies coming into Ukraine and either donating some or doing like a showcase of whatever they have, and then of course they provide feedback and things that we would have changed.
Okay. Would it be safe, I guess, for you guys to talk about what sort of adaptations you're having to do to this stuff? I don't want to, like, operational security wise, ask you questions that may expose things that could cost you their effectiveness, but like, what are you guys having to adapt specifically on these things?
It really depends on what kind of systems we're talking about. If it's small FPV drones, if it's bigger bombers, if it's unmanned ground vehicles, it depends on one way or another. The general comment that I can make from what I've gathered from different technology units is general feedback on internationally made products is that they are very over sophisticated without the basics being done. Like the
Okay.
unmanned ground vehicles that we spoke about at the event that I organized a couple of days ago, like the vehicle should be by by what it's done, it's supposed to be a fully autonomous, supposed to do all of those great things, bring you coffee in the morning, but it cannot drive in a difficult terrain. Like it's very simple. If you don't have the
Gotcha.
basic, you cannot add up all of those other things. That's the general feedback to all the things.
Okay.
So you, all of the internationally made military unmanned systems.
Gotcha. Yeah, so you're getting a vehicle that's good for the roadway, but not good for terrain that's been bombed or is muddy or whatever. Got you. Yeah, which that doesn't make any sense to provide you something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But but the things that we got on official channels from the US, the traditional warfare are great. Like US is good with traditional warfare. Um, so I have
But
no
unconventional warfare, you're saying that what you guys are getting from the U.S. needs to be better.
yes.
Unconventional warfare types of, yeah. Okay.
But again,
What?
most of the conventional warfare that we get from the US is unofficial. So it's most like companies coming into Ukraine and doing that,
Really?
not US government sending us things. Yeah.
What sort of stuff traditional wise are you guys getting from companies coming into Ukraine?
Traditional from countries coming into Ukraine.
Yeah, you said the traditional warfare stuff you guys are getting. What is it that's being provided? Does that make sense?
From US government.
You said that there were companies coming into Ukraine providing things that you would classify as traditional warfare, elements of traditional warfare.
Untraditional warfare, non-traditional
Untraditional.
warfare. Yeah.
Ah, okay. I misunderstood you. Got you. So you guys have private companies coming into Ukraine and then test. Basically, you guys are being used as a test bed. Is kind of what you're saying for what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does that make you feel?
Depends on how you look at it. At one side, maybe not so good to be a testing ground for technology, but uh, on the other side, we are partners. So we are here to also provide you with something, and that something is knowledge and experience. And if that's how we help our allies, that's how we help our allies. We are
I like that
interested
perspective.
in all of our partners being as strong as possible. We're interested in everyone having the best technology, and we are happy to provide our experience.
I like that answer. That's this is why having this conversation I think is really important because I think that a lot of people. I'll say this right. A lot of Americans who may watch this probably aren't going to like even just the fact that I'm talking to a Ukrainian soldier, right? But I don't care. I would talk to a Russian soldier too. I would talk, but I like talking to anybody and hearing what's going on because I'm not there and nobody else is there, right? Except you guys, So hearing about this and your answer with that is it's interesting to say the least. What else is there that you're talking about untraditional, unconventional warfare that you guys are doing really well?
I think we covered most of it.
Have you?
On unmanned systems, we talked about flying drones, unmanned ground vehicles. Actually, I have not seen a lot of unmanned ground vehicles from the US companies coming in. So if you are building an unmanned ground vehicle in the US, please come. We want to see what you got. We talked about naval drones, jamming. Yeah, so okay, we can talk about jamming as well. That's something that we've seen. Again, most countries fallen a little bit behind. Is creating jammers that are both size that is appropriate for the front line and that works in the conditions of the front line, but also is effective. But there isn't much to speak about this, but that's also another way in which we can help our partners understand better how to protect the cities, how to protect their fortified positions, or the military bases, or the planes, right? Because we're now putting jammers literally everywhere.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You said you said a while ago that you are working with a lot of Americans, and are a lot of these Americans that you guys are working with that have like come to Ukraine on their own? Are these a lot of these guys? Are they global war on terror veterans?
Yes, in our brigade, we have quite a few US veterans that have volunteered to come and join our brigade, even in the beginning of 2022, but some in 2023 and 2024. And these are just the people who have like a sense of justice, and they just here to fight on the side of good. A lot of them, they're very like we have conversations about the previous operations that they've done in other countries, and it's just very different from what they see in Ukraine. And a lot of them stayed here for so long because they want to learn as much as possible from here and then go back to the US and help understand their own soldiers how to use some resources more efficiently.
Yeah. When you hear them talk about and compare their past experiences, maybe in Iraq, Syria, or Afghanistan, and talking about what they're experiencing now, what are the differences, the comparisons, things like that they're making and talking about?
I think the main point in a lot of those conversations when we try to compare and why we cannot compare those like the previous engagements and here in Ukraine
Yeah.
properly is this is probably this is the first war in a while where we have near peer forces, where we don't have one. Well, people thought Russia is a lot more advanced than Ukraine in the beginning of the war, right? But what we
Absolutely.
see now, like the second biggest army in the world, is for 3 years trying to take like one village in eastern Ukraine. So we are near peer forces with Russia, and that conflict is very rare. And so that's why it really doesn't make sense to compare all of the previous operations that they're doing here in Ukraine.
Yeah, no doubt. I guess I'm sure they have their own conclusions and takeaways from it, like what is so different when, and because they are such contrasting things, what they think that they're feel like they're learning, and what's the most what the biggest lesson for them they're taking away from to go back to the United States, like you said. What have you heard them say, like, this is, in your opinion, like the biggest lesson you think these people are learning? What lesson do you think that would be?
That would be never underestimate your enemy. They
Tales
could,
all this time.
yeah, from the stories they tell us is they never had to think twice about what the enemy would do in an operation that they are planning, and they have like they could do crazy things without having to think how smart the enemy could be. And
Right.
here, because the enemy is smart, the enemy is big, and the enemy has a lot of resources, you have to think all of the possible smart acts that the enemy would do in any operation. And that's what I hear a lot of them talking about and a lot of them learning.
Yeah. Would you
And
say
obviously,
that the
that's the new thing for everyone.
say that one more time for me? Sorry about that.
And drones, how to use drones, how to operate on the battlefield with drones, things like this. How to use jammers. Not a lot of them knew how to do that.
Right. How would you say that having those guys there has been really beneficial to you, the Ukrainian war effort?
Of course, because a lot of them, especially the ones who came in 2022, they had some experience, and Ukrainian army like quadrupled in a day, and they helped a lot with training, especially like at least basic training, and they're really really good at it. So US soldiers that volunteered here in Ukraine, they have made us do immense progress in a very short time. So I'm super grateful for our brothers from the US.
Right. That's awesome. It's kind of a difficult question, but how do you think what you've been through the past couple of years has changed you as a person? Could you go back to being a banker at Morgan Stanley?
I think I can. Mm, but I think what the main change in me is that I cannot plan ahead. And before I did that, I had my whole career planned. I was like, I'm doing investment banking for this many years, going into private equity, and then going here and here. And now, honestly, like I don't think I'll see the end to this war myself. I think I'd sooner be killed than see the end to this. And that's a very sad realization to me because I'm like a super peaceful person, and I don't want to see war anymore in my life, and I want peace like every single Ukrainian. But unfortunately, with how things are playing out right now, it feels like not a lot of us will see the end to this war because our enemy doesn't understand peaceful talks; they only understand strength.
I hope that is not your fate. You know, I don't. I would I hope to not hear that that's happened to you. Absolutely. I'm just kind of curious what there. You said there's Americans there in Ukraine. I know that there's probably fighters from other countries too. The European countries I know have fighters there that are there of their own volition. What other countries have you seen? But like I know that the Chinese have a lot of people that have gone over to help and aid Russia as well, and then I know North Korea sent a bunch of troops, which was I think we all got a good laugh about that. Um, what other fighters from other countries have you seen, but on the other side? You guys seen any? Have you guys seen a bunch of Chinese volunteers or anything like that?
I have personally not seen, I have not worked with Chinese or North Koreans myself, but I do know my brothers in arms who have captured North Koreans that fought for Russia, and we do have confirmed Chinese citizens who fought on the other side. Nothing more. Nothing confirmed.
Gotcha. Just kind of curious, especially the American soldiers, veterans have a lot of experience, and I'm just kind of curious, what other countries, fighting, I guess, alongside Russia that have experience. I would think, the Chinese are sending people there, letting people go because they want them to get that experience because they just don't have that as a country, whereas obviously the United States does after being in the desert for 20 years. There's a lot of people with a lot of experience, but that experience is not necessarily relevant, I guess, to what is going on in Ukraine. Not in every sense. There, of course, is relevancy, but not in every sense. But I
Wait,
guess my go ahead.
sorry, I think you just tried to kind of compare, right? So we have some Americans and Europeans on the Ukrainian side, and then what kind of Russia has
Hmm.
to be able to do things effectively. But like I wouldn't go that route because Russia has a different strategy and they have different strategic moves that we do. Like we try to
Okay.
fight as we just talked about with drones, but also with
Hmm.
our infantry assaults. Like we try to fight as smart as possible. Where
Hmm.
on the other side, Russians have a different tactic when it comes to assaults. They do send right now for the past year. They've been sending small groups of infantry, like two, three, or four, sometimes on motorcycles,
Hmm.
sometimes just by foot, like two, three people to go into small raids, so that they first of all see where our positions are and then maybe kill like one or two people. Most of those small groups never get out alive from those assaults, but Russia doesn't care about this. They can sacrifice many, many of those small groups just to be able to distinguish where our positions are and kill some of our people. We cannot fight like this. That's why we need smart people on our side. That's why we have Americans that are helping us prepare. That's why we have European fighters that also have experience in in the army in their own countries. Russia doesn't need that. Russia needs meat. Russia needs people. They have a different
Yeah.
tactics. We cannot compare our tactics. It's very
Right.
different.
Yeah. No doubt. That's a good point to make. What else would you? How would you? I guess how other than what you just said about I guess just like war of attrition way of throwing people at the line and not really caring about the result. You guys have to be more strategic, like you said, and more intelligent with what you do because I guess you have the Ukrainian war effort has less soldiers and less resources than a country like Russia. But what else have you noticed difference wise between what you guys do? You've outlined some of it, like you said. Russian soldiers don't have humanity. You said that they don't really care. They just kind of attack. Like what else have you noticed other than those things?
We definitely see that they have, I don't want to say unlimited resources, but it feels like close to unlimited resources. It goes to like FPV drones. You can see that they are using a lot more of them. Not a lot of like, not necessarily effectiveness level is higher than ours, but there's just a lot more. of FPV drones in a number of usage, where we try to use every FPV drone as effective as possible. So I wouldn't send like 10,000 a day in one position, but we would send 1,000, but would have like 80% of effectiveness, and therefore use both money spent and the drones that we have as effectively, where Russia is both with people and the drones, they do it a little bit differently. And then you also seen the attacks on civilian cities and how horrible that is becoming with time, where if we hit strategic military either bases or manufacturing bases, they hit residential buildings with kids. And even like this week, we've seen a whole family that was killed in the bedroom because Russia likes to send their drones and missiles into random buildings. That's not a strategy of theirs. It's a strategy as well, right? If you think about this, that's all to make us afraid, to make us afraid of them.
Mm-hmm.
And to show this strength. Look, we can bomb Kiev. Look, we can bomb American factories in Western Ukraine, which happened a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you know about this. There's an American factory in Western Ukraine that was hit by a Russian missile or a Russian drone, one of the two, recently. It's all to show strength. Look, we can do whatever we want. That's another strategy of theirs. And another strategy of theirs, which we don't have, is once they occupy the territory, the things that they do to civilians, and the things they do to churches. And it's like when you see what Russia brings, like all the mass murders and everything that we've seen in the past 3 years, it's hard to believe that they do have any humanity left in them.
Are you willing to share any of that? Like what you guys have seen?
Yes, a lot of the things.
If it's too difficult, you don't have to. I understand.
Okay, you and I agree that you can ask any question, and I can, I'll respond to them. So that's okay. A lot of the things are public. A lot of things in Izum, for example, which is in eastern Ukraine. When we liberated Izum, we have found mass graves of civilians, and a lot of those civilians were like women with tied hands behind their back who were shot in the head. Kids with their hands tied behind the back. There are actual pictures online. If and anybody who's listening willing to look on those pictures, they're horrible. But we've seen Russia like mass executing civilians for whatever reason. Like we don't know why. Maybe they have found Ukrainian flag in the apartment. Maybe they have, I don't know, heard them speak Ukrainian. I personally don't know what the reasons are. I can only assume. And some of the people who survived those mass executions have shared some of these stories. But most of the things are some Russians assuming that they have any connection to Ukraine, or that they speak Ukrainian, or else, or that they are like part of evangelical churches, which has also been a big strategy of Russia, is to destroy churches, to execute any like religious leaders in the territory that they occupy, especially evangelical churches. They have executed a lot of evangelical church leaders in Ukraine and occupied territories. So yeah, when you see what Russia brings is on any occupied territory, even if I was not feeling like I'm a Ukrainian necessarily, or I didn't care which flag to live under, I would still not want to be under a regime that comes and kills whoever they want and like ties kids' hands behind their back and executes them. Like, think about this. Like, I cannot imagine how you can do this.
No, that's absolutely terrible. Yeah, I can see how that hits you. I appreciate you sharing that. I know that's not easy, you know. So I mean, I've seen a lot of really bad things happen to children as well. I was a military police officer for almost 15 years. I've never seen the result of somebody executing a child, but I have seen what adults have done to children abuse-wise in a lot of different ways, and how that's affected them, and the injuries they sustain from these things. And I agree with you. I don't know how anybody could harm a child in any way, shape, or form, let alone treating them, the way that you're talking about, or some of the other things that I've seen. So children certainly are innocent and should be treated as such, and should not be collateral damage or intentional damage when it comes to anything, whether it's warfare or your personal life, especially in my line of work. More often than not, it's a relative, where a parent or a sibling or something like that harms them, and that way it's absolutely terrible. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I know it is very difficult to talk about. I'm sure you've seen a lot of things.
Okay. And in addition to physical damage to kids, we've also seen a different move by Russians is stealing Ukrainian kids from occupied territories, when they executed their parents, or their parents were killed for a different reason. We have confirmed over 20,000 Ukrainian kids that were stolen from occupied territories and placed into a camp where they were filtrated, I guess you could say that, where they were taught that they're Russian, Russia's great culture, Russian
Like
language,
re-educated.
re-educate, yeah, there you go, re-educating camps, and then placed into Russian families as adopted as part of adoption. It's crazy
Yeah,
to think that that's happening.
right. That's a total attempt to eradicate Ukrainian culture, and to basically have a generation of people who won't identify as Ukrainians, as a way to erase, I guess, right? That's what that exactly is. It's trying to erase Ukrainian culture. That's terrible.
Absolutely.
Wow. I'm really interested in anything else, that you've got to say and hear, because I this is the first time I've spoken to somebody who is a Ukrainian soldier, and you're a Ukrainian medic, right? I've had the opportunity to learn from you, and anything you have and want to share. Like I said before, I don't know what I don't know, and whatever it is that you feel like is important to talk about, or that you want to talk about, the floor is yours. My questions are my questions, but they're whatever, to me, I prioritize what it is that you're wanting to say, and whatever, you're wanting to provide and talk about and bring attention to, over, the generic questions that I've got for you.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question?
Of course you can. Yeah,
For some
absolutely. This is a
topic that we
conversation. Yeah, yeah.
I think you mentioned something that you're surprised to see trench warfare, even after drones are now playing a huge role of this warfare. Why is that?
So I think that the surprise is more that there is trench warfare again, in the way that this is the modern era. And when you think of trench warfare, for me at least, and I think a lot of other people, the first idea that you think of is, you think of World War One, right? And then you think of, maybe even World War II, when the French built the Maginot Line. Then the Blitzkrieg completely went right over the top of that, and how much of a failure something like the Maginot Line was. And then to see, what's going on in Ukraine, there's, hey, look, we're back to trench warfare again, and this is, I'm not surprised to see that, necessarily, that trenches are being built. I think it's more like, wow, that seems to me, in my mind, a very, antiquated thought, or, way of waging war, but it's really not. It's also maybe my perspective of being, seeing the United States being at war in the desert for 20 years. But when I mentioned drones, I meant that more as like it's trench warfare with drones. So it's not the same. It's not like you'd mentioned before, you were so worried about artillery until, you had some experience. World War One, the amount of shells that were expended for artillery, it's insane. And you can go and visit some of these battlefields, and I have, and even World War II battlefields. You could see just how much artillery had an impact. It destroying forests, poisoning the soil, all these things, and trench warfare, and the artillery causing shell shock on these soldiers. I guess it's the shell shock now would be drones. Doesn't seem necessarily that artillery is as much of a factor as it has been in the past. So I think that was what my initial surprise when as this war between Russia and Ukraine progressed, was, oh look, wow, there's trenches, and then I saw a video one time of a drone. I think it was pretty sure it was a Russian drone that was being used as a flamethrower on top of a Ukrainian trench position, and it's just like you see how creative everybody is getting with a drone, and what you can do with the drone is almost just sort of this like blank canvas medium. You can, whatever the human mind could come up with to attach to this or whatever. And thinking about watching that video of this flamethrower drone, just like if you're in a trench, you're literally a sitting duck. You're like a fish in a barrel when it comes to something like that, or a drone. You're having to find a place to hide. It's kind of hard, and what is essentially a hallway. And yeah, that was my initial shock. Was, I think, or surprise, was just like, when you think of modern warfare, trench warfare is not what comes to your mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, especially when you mentioned that like experience of US military is mostly fighting in the desert and very different, again, very different conditions and also very different objectives, right? Because for us, what we're fighting for is like every single piece of the land that's possible. We want to liberate every single, you don't use meters, but meter of Ukrainian land.
Mm-hmm.
And who controls, like, if you not use it, if you don't have, okay, maybe also, so trenches are like open, let's say hallways, right? They opened, but there are dugouts, and dugouts are the positions and kind of the fortified positions that we use to hold a certain place. And if you don't have infantry present in those places, it's nobody's territory. You cannot just fight with drones. That would be just, it would not make any sense. Somebody has to be present in order to claim the territory. So it
Right.
makes sense that there is infantry, right? If there is no infantry, whose territory is that?
Yeah.
We have to buy food, like go in and do all those operations.
Right.
Actually, one thing that when I speak with people from different countries and I say, oh, like we did an assault, blah blah blah, but they're like, oh, like with air assaults, and I'm like, no. For us, an assault is we actually have like 2 or 3 storm groups that are going in and liberating a position, liberating a forest line, liberating a town, a village. Like my battalion, for example, last week we liberated a village in eastern Ukraine, and it was done by soldiers on foot, obviously with support of drones. But the people who are having a foot on the ground are the people who hold in the position and are the people who are owning the place. So in that sense, I guess because the objective is different, like if you don't have foot on the ground there, you cannot control the territory properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
No,
infantry
absolutely.
is never going to leave the front line. Never going
Mm-hmm.
to have build, especially in like near peer forces. European war, I guess, because we have forests and everything. We're never going to replace infantry with drones. Even with ground drones, what we spoke about, we use ground drones for logistical operations now, but we're never going to replace on positions infantry with drones. We use UGVs for fire support with machine guns, for example, or MK19, but they're never
Mm-hmm.
going to replace a infantry soldier in position, because only infantry soldier can make decisions that are difficult. It can only make
Mm-hmm.
decisions that are needed, but also the ones who can claim a territory.
Right.
All of those things that we do are in support of infantry. We're never going to replace
Mm-hmm.
them, but we're going to try to minimize the risks, because with the drone dominance in the air, it's so risky for infantry to do any kind of movement. So
Mm-hmm.
we try to support them as much as possible. And
Yeah.
it's maybe something, again, that can be learned from this war to other countries. Definitely for European countries, it would be useful to understand how the planning works with drone dominance, but with infantry constantly present on positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I totally agree with you. Drones, technology, all of that, I don't think is anywhere close to replacing the human on the battlefield. I think it's completely and totally something that will augment and has augmented for a long time, and that role of augmentation will increase a lot. Let's just say, a global conflict happens, God forbid something like that doesn't happen, that the augmentation of technology and the human soldier will be at a scale we've never seen before. But I agree with you. I don't think you can take the human out of that equation completely. There are some things in the world that you can take the human out of the equation, so to speak. But even then, like if you're talking about maybe like I've seen medical procedures that have been done with robotics, but there is a person there supervising and watching what's going on just in case something does go wrong, because like you said, the robot can't make a decision, and you also can't get rid of the intuition that a human being has. I think there's something to be said for that. That is a very real thing. And that intuition comes from being able to feel out a situation. It comes from having experience and all these things. And so, I mean, I think what you said it's a great point. And I'm just kind of, I had an argument with a former NCO of mine one time about modern conflict, and she tried to paint this narrative about World War III, just to use that term, being a cyber conflict. And I told her I thought that was really dumb. And one of the things I mentioned was internet access, and I talked about undersea cables, which obviously they get cut all the time, and how this narrative, I guess, she was holding on to and trying to push on other people, younger junior NCOs who are very impressionable, was that boots on the ground, what you're talking about, is going away. And I think that it's just absolutely stupid, and was a very stupid opinion to have. But there are people who think like that. Is kind of the point I'm making here, is that technology will replace, and I think that it won't replace. I think it will augment, and that augmentation may increase, and the involvement and the integration that technology augments what human beings are doing, and conflict will, that support will be more grand than it has been, but you'll never get rid of the human being on the battlefield.
Yeah. I agree. And even now in 2025, we have new people that are coming in the military, and they have not experienced that life without drones and that like full ownership of your position, and full decision making on your position like infantry did in 2022, 2023. And that's very sad, because they cannot think as pure infantry anymore. They think of infantry plus drones plus all of this is happening. But one thing that we've noticed is that the best drone commanders, like not operators necessarily, but the people who are planning, either flying drones or ground drones units, are the people who came from infantry, because only they can understand what operations are like. Only they can think as infantry. Only they can think
Right.
better as an enemy and plan those operations much better. So the most efficient and the most effective drone units that we see, they commanders usually came from infantry.
That's interesting, actually. I would love to talk more about that. How do you guys organize your drone units? I mean, you just gave an example, right, of how the best people to make decisions on how drones are used are people who've been on the front lines. Like, how else do you guys organize for efficiency, for lethality? How do you guys organize in that facet, right? Like, drone units are something that is relatively new. Like, we've had small unmanned aerial system units in the U.S. military for quite a while, but most of those drones are not necessarily the same sorts of drones, or the ones that I used, I'll say, right? Like, because I've used drones too, but I haven't used like attack and kill drones, and most of these like ISR asset type drones, right? So drone units have existed in the U.S. military for a while, but how do you guys organize your use of drones when it comes to manpower, decision making, all of that stuff, as far as a unit goes?
So I can only speak on how I make those decisions in my brigade, not to step on anybody else's decision making. So I can only speak on how we do this. And I'm gonna start with saying that probably if we were in a peaceful time, it would have been different, the way we organize it. But the way it's done right now is a lot of infantry soldiers after 2022 and a little bit of 2023. They have gone through either multiple injuries or or for some reason they were like they lost a lot of their brothers in arms and they wanted to do something else. They wanted to change what they doing on the battlefield. And with the use of FPV drones, a lot of them started learning how to fly FPV drones. And so a lot of the times, after somebody's injured or after somebody has done quite a while of infantry, and if you're constantly on the front line in Ukraine, even 6 months of infantry is way too much. So a lot of them just started finding something else to do, and that was FPV drones or that was bomber drones. So the organization went more self-organization, where people got together and said, look, we have FPV drones, we want to try use them, can we use them? And our commanders would be like, maybe you can try, go in position and try to fly them. And so this was done more of initiative of soldiers. This is what we want to do. And after they showed some results, the commanders were like, yeah, you're allowed to do whatever you want to do now. here's a platoon for you. You're now FPV drone platoon. Same with UGVs. Like a year ago, I remember I was helping put together a presentation, like a pitch presentation for the guys that wanted to do unmanned ground vehicles, because the commanders didn't know what it was. Like the commanders, they will not trust anything until they see some results. So we were literally putting together a pitch presentation of why there's perspective in unmanned ground vehicles. And then those guys have found funds to go buy first unmanned ground vehicles and show, look, this works now. This can work. This can do this. This can do logistics. And then after a while, the commanders of the brigade said, look, you're right. Here's a platoon for you. You can do a platoon of unmanned ground vehicles. And now those guys are company size, and they soon to be a battalion. So it's mostly people coming with their own initiative, and then the commanders are listening to this and are giving them freedom to do whatever they want if they show to be effective.
Wow. So it's still very much a process and a learning process for you guys. I think it's an interesting question because the U.S. military is very organized structurally when it comes to chain of command and all of that, and functionality, who's in charge, decision making, and that's a big difference, I think, between the U.S. and a lot of militaries. I mean, you guys, the use of drones, you guys have more experience, right? And to learn what you guys' best practices are and where what you're taking away from doing it, who is best to make decisions, like all of this, when the United States, is now standing up units that use drones, and that's their role primarily, right? These are lessons that are very valuable about what you guys are learning and taking away from it, because it's trial by fire, quite literally. The efficiency that the improvement you guys see day to day from what you're doing. You're implementing those changes, and as things go and progress, like you're adapting as the battlefield adapts. It's like extremely valuable information.
But a valuable thing for all of those unmanned systems units is they are all a part of planning for every single assault operation that we do. Like, they're not just told what to do. They're not shown coordinates and said, here's where you have to strike. They are in the process of planning, where they can also put on the table what they think is right. Unmanned ground vehicles can say where they think the best locations for certain things could be. And like that more flat organizational structure that we have on the battlefield is definitely helping a lot. I'm not saying it's the best. Again, we don't know. We cannot compare really right now, but it's shown to be pretty effective.
That's awesome.
Other things that you asked me before, but we never got a chance to speak. But I think those are the two things. If we have time, I would like to speak on them.
Totally.
The two things that people ask a lot about, and sometimes they get it wrong, is one, the question they asked about, like, who's winning, essentially, right? Who's winning, Ukraine and Russia? How do we know? Or when I see on the news, who's winning? Ukraine is winning, Russia is winning. What does that mean for me?
The news here, the news here is very much that the Ukraine is losing, I think, and there's such a split here in the United States. when it comes to this. It's a very polarizing topic, this conflict. There are people in the United States who I think if they were to pick a side, would say that they stand on the side with Russia, right? And the excuses, or the not necessarily excuses. I think their reasons are some of the ones I mentioned earlier about how the Ukrainian government is so corrupt, and the people there are ethnically Russian. Like, these are things that are said, not necessarily true, right? But these are what people think, and so they say, well, the United States has treated Russia as a boogeyman since post World War II, right? And obviously, the United States and Russia had the Cold War for forever, and that mentality stuck even after the collapse of the USSR. That Cold War mentality was maintained, and this thought process. And I think a lot of people in the United States are like, well, why are we still doing this? We shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have been in a Cold War with Russia. We shouldn't. The United States is the aggressor, all these other things. And then there's another half who says, well, the United States is who convinced Ukraine to get rid of their nuclear weapons, and said that we would provide safety for them. This was during when Bill Clinton was president, and that essentially they still also view Russia as an enemy of the United States, and there are people who stand with Ukraine. And then there are a lot of Americans who don't want war anyway, but are like, I don't care. I don't care about Russia. I don't care about Ukraine. I care about problems in the United States. I care about our own government corruption. I care about all of the money we spend that doesn't go to American citizens. I care about the immigration issues that are going on in this country. I care about the medical, pharmaceutical, and the insurance issues that are going on in this country. Most Americans, I think, care more about fixing problems in America than providing aid anywhere else right now, because of 20 years of the global war on terror. And I think a lot of Americans feel very abandoned, I guess, by the U.S. government, and they see this is just a win again for the large American military industrial complex, like the Northrop Grummons, the Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons, and they're mad about the problems here for the average American citizen not being solved, And I'm trying to remember your original question. I've gone on a little bit of a tirade about that. That's the perspective, right? You asked about who's winning. It kind of depends on what news you're listening to. One side will say, well, the United States is just prolonging a war the Ukrainian people are going to lose anyway, and that because we're prolonging this war, Ukrainians are losing their lives, and that Ukrainians need to just be okay with losing these regions that have been invaded by the Russians, because they're just prolonging a war effort that they're going to lose anyway. And then there's another group of people who are like, well, Russia is our natural enemy. We should be helping the Ukrainians. We have a responsibility to help the Ukrainians because we convinced them to get rid of their nuclear weapons, and so we should provide security for them. And that if Ukraine was still a nuclear power, then maybe Russia wouldn't have invaded Ukraine. And there's all these, and then not to mention all of the non-governmental organizations that have been involved in Ukraine for a long time. Going back to 2014, we talk about an election that you guys had in the country that the United States was very much involved in. And so there's all these things that the United States Americans have, point of view wise. I don't think I think people have an opinion on who's winning, so to speak, but nobody really knows, right? And from your point of view, how do you feel Ukraine is doing? I think that's a more important question.
You said a lot of very important things here, which I do, for most part, agree with, especially from perspective of somebody who lived in the U.S. for a long time. Like, I do think there are a lot of issues in the U.S. that needs to be prioritized and fixed. I absolutely see that, and I've seen this when I lived in the U.S., and I see this now from outsider perspective. But I'll get to this in a little bit. First, what do I think? Who is winning? I think Ukraine is doing so much better than everyone thinks we're doing. If you look at Russia's original plan and the original strategy or plan. Russia isn't winning the way it wants. They wanted Kyiv in 3 days. They wanted our capital, and we're now in the fourth year of war, and Ukraine still stands. And if in 2022 Kyiv was surrounded on three sides, there were invasion on three sides of the capital. Now I have to drive 8 hours to see the first Russian, right, all the way to the east. So Kyiv itself was surrounded in the beginning. Now life in Kyiv, like, fully back to normal, aside of missile attacks and Shahed drone attacks. But on a daily basis, everyone lives here like it was before the full-scale invasion. So yeah, Russia has already lost its primary goal, is to take Kyiv and demilitarize Ukraine. It's not going well for them. And the reality is, after 11 years of war, we take 2014 as well, Russia has managed to take like less than 20% of our country. For 11 years, for the second biggest army in the world, and for the size of the military that they have, that, if you ask me, that is not victory at all. They failed to take everything that they wanted, essentially. That is on the larger side. On a more concrete examples, I already shared, like, operations like Spiderweb Operation, which, not for whatever reason, this information doesn't get a lot to the Western media. But there are, on a daily basis, operations like this that are very efficient, that are very impactful, that are very high scale, and that are very cheap for Ukraine with our resources. Like, we use our resources in the most efficient way possible. And I think that's what shows the victory. And if we can do so much with, let's say, $100,000 drones that we did for Spiderweb operations, what can we do with $1 million? Think about this. So every single dollar that is given to Ukraine, or that is Ukraine funds by itself with, like, fundraising, things like this, is used in the most efficient way possible. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't get, and that's something that I think personally is a victory. That's one side. Second thing that I see a lot of people misunderstanding as well is that Ukraine is like this blood-wanting, blood-sucking nation that just wants to keep fighting and killing people. We touched a little bit on this, but we want peace. Like, we want peace. We never want to think about war again. We don't want to kill people. We would never have started this if Russians didn't come to our country and did not invade our land. And unfortunately, we have seen that Putin does not respond well to peace negotiations or to any sort of peaceful agreements. Putin doesn't respond well to people being nice to him. And only strength is what works on Russia, and that's the only thing that we've seen that works well on them. You mentioned giving up Donbass, because Russia apparently wants Donbass. But if they only want Donbass, why in the past 2 months they started attacking a new region in Ukraine that is not Donbass? It's Dnipro region. They have started invading that part of Ukraine that is not in any of their immediate list, I guess. That just shows, with all other things that Russia has done and has said, that they want whole Ukraine and not just Ukraine. So they imperialistic ideas are far beyond what they're asking for right now. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. As for, like, funding the war in Ukraine and the American side, as I said, I fully agree and acknowledge that there are so many things that need to be prioritized in the US for US citizens. Things like healthcare that you mentioned. And again, I experienced by myself when living in the US. Fully on board on that. But that doesn't at all border with the help aid that we're receiving from the US, because most of the things that we receive from the US are secondhand weapons, are things that are not planning to be used by US Army, let's be honest. And we're doing incredible things. We're super incredibly grateful and thankful for all of the weapons that we received, and we're doing amazing things with them already, with secondhand things. And any aid to Ukraine actually fuels back into American economy and makes US be more ready for any conflict in the future there is to come, because you are guys manufacturing better new weapons and you are learning from Ukraine on the other side. So I wouldn't say it's something that I obviously, as somebody who lived in the US and who cares deeply about the US, and like I considered it my second home, I fully on board with prioritizing all the things inside America. I don't think helping Ukraine is opposite of that. I think it is helping on a larger scale. In terms of any peace negotiations, is another question that I get a lot. Is, again, we're all for it. We want peace. I want the war to stop today and never start again. But we never have seen Russia being true to these ceasefire agreements. Actually, so there's an NGO, Snake Oil Institute, that I'm working on right now, and we did a survey within Ukrainian military who have fought since 2014, and 91% of surveyed Ukrainian soldiers reported directly witnessing or experiencing violation of ceasefire agreements only since 2014. So yeah, we don't think, like, we're all for negotiating for agreements. We just need security guarantees. We're very, very grateful for President Trump and the administration for everything that they're doing. I think they're doing correct steps in the right direction. We're all on board. We want to see an end to this war, and we're happy to help in any way, shape possible, but it has to be just, and it has to be so I don't have to fight again in 2 years, and so, or my kids don't have to go and fight and do whatever I have to do right now again.
Can I ask you what the Ukrainian military, you guys, people you know specifically, your opinion on the difference between this war has seen two U.S. presidents, President Biden and President Trump. Your guys' views on both the aid you've received from America under President Biden, the rhetoric that's come out of the United States under President Biden versus the aid coming from President Trump, the rhetoric coming from President Trump.
Previous administration did not show any actions, and I can probably speak for not all, but most of the military is very frustrated with that. And when President Trump came into power, everyone was and is very excited to see the actions actually play out. And we're very excited to see them as soon as possible.
Got you. I had a feeling that might be the opinion, but my other question to you is there is this impression, and again, I'm talking about the perspective of people here in the West, right? Not necessarily what's true, but perspective, right? That Ukrainian people don't like President Zelensky, and that he canceled elections, and that he wants to see the war continue. All of this, these are things that are talked about in American Western media. So I guess two part of that question, right? Like, how do the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian military, see President Zelensky, and how do you guys feel about, or what is your opinion, I guess, on what I said the sort of Western sentiment is on President Zelensky?
Look, I will speak for myself because I cannot speak for the whole military, especially since President Zelensky is our chief of command.
Yeah, no, I get you, and I definitely understand that. It's when the U.S. military can't speak about it. The president is the commander in chief, so I get that absolutely. Yeah, so don't get yourself in trouble. But yeah.
Okay. I personally think President Zelensky has shown strength in the beginning of the war, and it was really well received by the West. And I do think some of the rhetoric and some of the actions that he did in the beginning of the war really helped us. Especially things like, I don't need evacuation, I need weapons, where he, as an example, showed that these are our values as Ukrainians. Were very helpful in the beginning of the war. But honestly, it's fourth year of the war, and he, as all of us, is tired. And he has done some mistakes, and we've seen these mistakes already been done with the Trump administration. And we condemn those mistakes, and we hope that those mistakes don't represent the whole whole Ukraine. It's kind of my thing. In terms of
Mm.
elections, in my personal opinion, we have, as I said, about 20% of country occupied, and all of those people will not be able to vote. I don't I don't think there's a way to do a fair election right now in Ukraine without having the voice of that percentage of population. And then secondly, if you do an election, it's a physical you you put in one place a lot of people on one day or in multiple days, which we have seen is the target for Russians. So I think it'd be very dangerous for people to do an election in person, and it would not a a good percentage of Ukrainian population will not be able to vote at all. So my personal opinion,
Mm.
it's very difficult to do a fair election, and we're all for a fair election.
Mm. Got you. Yeah, see, this is a perspective, that you just don't get from somebody who isn't there and Ukrainian, right? I appreciate you giving an answer that you are able to give. I understand, if somebody asked me a question when I was still serving in the U.S. military about the president, I would have to navigate that one, pretty tenderly. So I get it completely. Another thought I had and question for you is, when people talk about war and they ask questions, people who served in them, there's always talk about very terrible things, right? And the people who fight the war don't get the attention they deserve, as much as the attention that gets brought toward the leaders of countries, and who are involved in that, right? And making decisions from your vantage point, right? People you've known that you've served alongside, and you don't have to name names, but like, what are some of the best things, the best qualities about the people that you've served with that give you motivation, and you think that people should hear about, as just human beings?
Wow, that's a very powerful question. Um, here in Ukraine, I feel like our media is trying to do some justice to regular soldiers, and there are a lot of interviews with regular soldiers, which I think should be also done maybe more in the US and kind of here, and maybe like kind of what we're doing right now is just a perspective of things. But the quality that I probably have seen the most inspiring is selflessness, if that's a word.
Yes.
And that is the most inspiring quality in the people that I've seen. And that selflessness usually comes from deep belief in their values, and they understand that they are standing up for what they believe in, and what they believe in is more important than their own life. And a lot of people are fighting under that belief that what they believe in, and that is freedom, is more valuable than their own life. Super inspiring, and I have seen people who think they are dying in my evacuation vehicles who have talked about their values, and as they think they're dying, it's very powerful. I have seen people pray before they think they're dying as well. And in that prayer, they would also speak about freedom and about, their families and things that they're fighting for. So those are super powerful things. So selflessness, like strong belief in something, whatever that is religion for some people, whatever that is their family, whatever that is freedom, whatever that is fighting on a good side of the world, as we're doing right now, like these are the most inspiring things.
I like that answer. Are you religious at all?
I was brought up religious, for sure. I don't necessarily follow every day my religion,
Hmm. Just
but I
curious.
do believe there's something greater.
Higher power. Well, maybe I'll just ask you one more question, and I'll let you go. And I'm glad. I hope the air raid siren has stopped. I'm glad. Yeah, it stopped. That's good.
No, no, it has not. No.
Oh, Oh, okay. Cause I can't hear it. All right. No, it's still going on. So there you go. Right.
To give you perspective, it goes on for maybe like a minute, and then when it's off, it goes on again. So
Got
you
you.
only see like the announcement and the ending that you
Ah,
hear, and
okay.
then the rest is just danger.
Got you. Well, maybe one more question, and then I'll let you go. But I appreciate you spending a little over 2 hours talking to me, for sure. And I wanted to. Well, first I'll do this. If you have other questions for me, feel free to ask them. You're always welcome to ask questions. I always like to tell people that this is a. It's not like an interview. This isn't the news. I like to treat these as conversations. So if you have questions for me too, you feel free to ask. Anything you want to ask is on the table for sure. But unless you have questions, which you're more than welcome to, one of the last things I guess would like for you to tell people is what you think others need to know about you and the people you serve with that they just aren't going to hear from a news segment.
So many difficult questions. I was not ready for them. um, I guess like I'm an example of a lot of the things that my brothers and sisters in arms are like value, not are, but value. And like for me, I think I did a selfless thing when I said, I have this amazing job and great career, amazing opportunities, great apartment in Manhattan, but that doesn't matter to me because my country's at war, and because I realized that this might spread to other people, and I never want to see anybody, not a single European, American, or any other person in the world, have to deal with what Ukrainians have to deal with. And my understanding that it might spread further was a pushing factor for me to say, okay, what I do right now doesn't matter. My life doesn't matter. I need to be able to say that I have participated in stopping this. And I want to be able, if I survive, if I have kids, let's say, I want to be able to look them in the eyes and say, hey, I fought for your future. Hey, I did everything I could. I actually did everything I could to make sure you have a future and to make sure you have a peaceful life. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my brothers and sisters in arms feel the same way. Like we want to have the dignity, like we have the dignity in what we do. And so we want to either like look a next generation in the eyes and not feel shame, or even look like yourself in the eyes in the mirror and don't feel shame for not standing up and not being brave when you had to.
Right.
Because if everything fails and we're under occupation and we're in like the worst possible scenario ever and we survive, we at least could say, hey, I tried.
Absolutely.
And
You have
we
to
all,
look
and
yourself in the mirror at the end of the day.
that is true. And we want that for not just Ukraine, but for the rest of the world. And so a lot of us do feel like we are fighting for the greater freedom, for European and American and all of the values that we share together. Like for me, it's very clear how close in values and worldview Ukrainians and Americans are, because obviously I lived in both countries. So when you ask questions today, it was for me very obvious that like we are literally the same in lots of things. Um, but yeah, so another thing is that we are fighting for greater peace, and we don't want this war to spread anywhere further. That's why we hold in on to the last bits of whatever we have and use our resources as efficiently as possible for this.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. Listening to you talk about what you felt about being able to tell your children that you did the right thing and you stood up and preserving your own personal dignity and the love you have for your country, I think is very reminiscent of the sentiment after 9/11. I was 14. I was a freshman in high school when that happened. And my dad served in the U.S. military. We were on a U.S. military installation overseas when that happened. When 9/11 happened, I wasn't actually in the United States. We were in Japan. But that sentiment you're describing and the feeling when you talk about and talk to service members who joined after 9/11, you said almost everything the same. It's the same thing. Defending your country, doing the right thing. I need to stand up. I have to preserve the dignity I have and love for this country. I want to make sure that the future for my kids is a peaceful one, all these things, you know. And 20 years in the global war on terror, I know that there were, like, I served at the same time as my dad did, right? And I know that there were others who, there were fathers and sons serving in country at the same time, you know. And I don't think I don't necessarily think that a lot of the hope that a lot of Americans had came to fruition from that, but the sentiment is exactly the same.
Yeah, as I said, they're very similar.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, after tragic events, we remind ourselves about this, but
Yeah,
we
no,
are we
absolutely.
have very similar values. Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
And we spoke about this with my managing directors at Morgan Stanley. But by the way, my managing directors were very supportive of me going, which I was very surprised about because you always hear about the asshole investment bankers, but my team was just very different. And one of the managing directors at my group, he is a veteran himself, and
Hmm.
he pulled me in his office and he actually spoke about how he felt after 9/11. And I told him how I felt at that point, and it was very similar. And we spoke about how the sentiments that we shared after
Right.
tragic events in our countries.
Hmm. They're a great unifier as well, and not just like warfare wise, but humanity. I think requires struggle, and I think that shared struggle is what creates bonds, and it's what creates the groundwork for tribes, nations, all of that is to struggle together, and seeing something you love together be attacked or destroyed or whatever is more than motivation, right? It is a deeper carnal thing. I think that just exists in the mind of most human beings, and I'm not surprised to hear you say the things that you said at all because I understand them completely and I've seen it firsthand in Americans after 9/11 and then the consistency of the war on terror, but it's not surprising to hear you say those same exact things. And I think it's one thing too that is everybody who has served in the military sort of comes away with is not our differences but our similarities more than anything. And when you look at the diversity of friend groups in the military, you got a cowboy, you got a black kid from inner city Chicago, you got somebody who grew up in a Mexican family, you got the Asian kid, whatever, and they're all friends. And the unifier is the fact that it says whatever, U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Marine Corps, whatever on their uniform, and that's that unifier, But I don't know if you felt like you had other questions for me. If you do, but I'm all ears. So.
I really appreciate your time. We actually spent over 2 hours speaking, so thank you so much for your time. I guess my question is that you can help with, help me understand better, is we agreed that some of the information that I shared today, even things like some operations that we did, some of developments in unmanned systems, doesn't necessarily get out there to regular Americans. What do you think is the best way to make sure this information gets out there? Should this information even get out there, would it something that would be interesting for Americans to read or to shape their perspective? And if yes, how can we Ukrainians help with getting this information out there?
I think doing things like this, podcasts, alternative media spaces, is a good way. I think a lot of Americans get their information from sources like this, and the news, the mainstream news, right, is very manipulated and controlled. And not to say that like private people like me, and not necessarily me, but others in the alternative media space aren't manipulated as well, because you can tell that there are right others in the alternative media space that are manipulated. But I think doing things like this, I think that having a presence on platforms like X or Instagram, wherever, Blue Sky, all of these things that are used as social media platforms is a good way to do that. I don't know. I've never looked if there are a bunch of Ukrainian service members who have Substacks. Are you familiar with Substack?
I am, but not a lot of service members in Ukraine.
Yeah, but I mean, it would, if you had the time, right? Like maybe even after, if there is an after that kind of thing, writing about it, putting that out there that way, and not charging for it, right? And giving your perspective video. Like if you had, I know you on your social media, right? You have, was it around like 25,000 followers? I think somewhere close to there. The what you, yeah, what you put on there is very important, and I think that humanizing yourself and humanizing those that you serve with is a relatable thing. So more of that, right? Keep doing that, I would say, and then going on shows like this and giving your perspective and being open to ask, being asked whatever questions. Because, like I said, I don't know how talking to everybody would go. Not everybody shares or is as open minded or shares the sentiments that you're talking about. But going on and having conversations with everyday people, I think like this would be probably one of the best ways.
Thank you. We'll try to do more of this. So with these NGO that I mentioned, Snake Oil Institute, we're also working on having more Ukrainian military being present at international events, and again, like regular soldiers that have experienced things that I have experienced, who can speak firsthand about how they view the war in Ukraine or the developments in technology. So we're working on in that sense, which I think will be helpful. And it's not in any sort of propaganda. It's literally just sharing experience and what they've learned, and like lessons learned are very important for everyone, I believe. And as I said, like we're fully on board with everything that the current administration is trying to do. Super on board. Super thankful for the mineral deal. I think that was a great step in the right direction. Again, we haven't spoke about this today, but I just thought of mentioning this.
I like that you
And
said that, actually. Continue. I don't want to interrupt you, but I like that you said that. I'll tell you why.
okay, I mean, I think it's clear, right? Because it's a very clear sign that Ukraine doesn't just want charity, that we want to buy our own weapons, and we're ready to share our resources to do that. And that ties into that we believe Ukraine should be a partner, not a beggar. Ukraine is a partner, not a beggar. Like we can give you something that you guys need, and you guys can give us something that we need, and we're willing to work together and not just ask.
I like that you put it that way, because so I live in California, which is a very liberal part of the United States. New York is too, which is where you've lived.
I did college in California,
Oh, where at?
in San Francisco.
Oh, okay. Well, I
Right
live right
over.
outside of. Okay, I live right outside of Sacramento, so not too far. But we talk about this. I have coworkers who are civilians who have never served in the military, and the mineral deal actually is something that's come up before, and it's always used as a vector to say the United States is essentially just draining Ukraine of its natural resources, and I've argued and pushed back against that, sort of in the same way that you said that it should be a partnership, and with the amount of money and weapons that the United States has provided to Ukraine, we should operate as partners in these ways. And so to hear you say that, right, somebody who is a Ukrainian medic in the Ukrainian military say that, when Americans who, I don't know, always choose to see the United States as the bad guy, are met with that sentiment from you, right? Like, there's really not much else they can say, you know. But that's cool that you went to college in California. I'm not originally from California. I'm actually originally from Florida, which is on the other side of the country, which is not as liberal as California. But that's cool that you've been here and you've spent. Is California and New York the only two places that you lived in the U.S.?
No, I also lived in Texas, in Fort Worth area.
Oh, okay. Fort Worth and Dallas. Nice. What'd you think about Texas?
It was very different from what I am used to. I had a huge culture shock. I was 15 as well when I went there, and it was the first time I
Oh,
went abroad, Ukraine. It was the first time I went like outside of my small town, honestly. And I was it's just the way of life is very different, and not to say it's better or worse, it's just very different. But I think I enjoyed it, and I became almost like a cowgirl at the end of my time there. I do have cowboy boots or cowgirl boots that I still own, and I miss it. I really want to go back.
you'd go back to Texas.
Yeah, at least for a visit. I'd love to.
Would you? Do you think after what you've been through with this war with Russia that you would move back to the United States, or would you want to stay in Ukraine?
As I said, like I don't know what my future will look like. I don't think it will look like, I don't think it will be, there will be a future for me at all. But if there will be, I cannot say what my head will be like.
Mm, yeah.
Um, I can change my mind and say, you know what, I think I've done enough and I want to live somewhere else and like go live in Bali or something. Or I will just keep living in Ukraine and doing something else to change Ukraine after this war ends.
Mm. Yeah. It's I hope that, like I said it before when you said that, I hope that's not your fate. You know, I hope that you get to see the end of this and that you get to have a life where you can live your best life, like you said a few different times. Whether that is in Ukraine, or maybe you go back to Texas and decide you're going to buy a ranch with a bunch of horses and get to use your cowgirl boots. Who knows? You know? But whatever it is, I hope it is a good thing. And I appreciate you talking to me today. And I'll say this: you're more than welcome to come back on. I would love to keep in touch with you on WhatsApp and talk. And if you ever want to come back on and say, "Hey, Brandon, we should talk about this, and this would be really interesting. I think people need to hear this," you're always welcome to just shoot me a text message and let me know, and we'll set it up with the time difference and get it going. So, and again, Victoria, thank you very much for coming on and talking to me today. And I'll keep in touch with you about how this episode comes out. So.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time and for adjusting to the time difference. I really enjoyed this conversation and I hope
Me
we'll stay
too.
in touch.
Me too. All right. Well, everybody listening, thank you guys for your time. Please check out the show notes. And then, Victoria, I'll put you the link to your Instagram account. Are you on other social media?
I am. I'll share all of them with you.
Okay. And I'll put those in the show notes for you guys listening to go and check those out. But Victoria, please, I'll stop, just hang out afterwards, like I said before, so we can make sure the recording gets uploaded the right way. But again, thank you so much for your time. Would love to see you get to the end of this and find out what it is that you're going to do afterwards. But thank you, and be safe.
Thank you.